All right, troops, as you start to think about designing your two different posters, you have obviously two choices well, not two choices. You actually have to do one that involves an image and one that is purely graphic. Okay, so we'll take the, we'll look at the two designs and we'll pick the best of the two to push to the final. Now, when you're thinking about using an image, well, let's talk about one other thing about the style. Um, there's obviously a number of styles that you can approach. And so when you think about designing your two posters, one design could be a little kind of artsy fartsy, you know. It could be super clean and graphic. It could have abstraction. It could include a graphic type of image. It could be super clean, or in this case, this one's a little on the edgy side, right? It has slightly edgy typography, slightly edgy type font, and so on. This one, a little bit artsy fartsy, right? So you have a variety of ways that you can approach this design. So one should probably be super clean, and one should, probably sort of border on, a little bit. Actually, most of these are tending towards the super clean. What was where was the one that I had that was edgy? I can't remember where it was. Oh, here it is right here. Or it might be something a little more on the edgy side, okay? Or on the arty side, okay? So you got super clean, you've got kind of edgy, or you got kind of artsy fartsy. All right, so those are sort of the stylistic ways that you can approach it. So now, when you're thinking about an image, an image has some recognizable features about it. In other words, it is a picture of something. And so in this case here, we have a face. And in general, when you're working with an image, the information needs to work around it. It probably shouldn't intrude upon the image, at least if it does only minimally, because the image itself has some impact to the design. And so you don't want to muck that up with typography or something else on top of it. You want to think about the contrast of typefaces, right? So in this case, we've got a nice, very elegant script with a kind of an edgy typeface. And when you combine contrast in your styles, then you have a much more interesting hook, right? If everything's the same, then it is less, it's less compelling. You're asking the user to you're not asking the user for much. When you have something with contrast, you're asking the user to become engaged a little bit further. In this case here, the large type is probably a little on the large size. It probably could have been a little smaller. I'm feeling like all the negative space has been used up. There's not a lot of breathing room here. Also, just notice, for example, here, the line spacing isn't equal. So if you have descenders in your text, like a lowercase g or a lowercase p or something like that, it's going to change the overall look of the spacing. Like here, no descenders, no descenders. And so these three, even though they're probably equally spaced mathematically, they're not equally spaced visually. So you need to be aware of those sorts of things, okay? Probably more typefaces than necessary, but she picked, maybe it's a he, I can't remember now, but they picked this sort of typewriter typeface for the award competition text, which probably should be a little larger, right? The award competition is kind of a big deal, right? So something that you want to think about in terms of hierarchy, and then use the same typeface for the call to action and so here it's a situation where, a little bit smaller would have been good. Here, the idea of using a word cloud, it kind of works, in this case here, even though the categories are all combined into this word cloud idea, it works in its own way. Now, if you were like, oh, this is cool, and you go to your fine print and you see where you need to contact in order to, get more information, you'd see these categories. And so it does make some sense. What's really nice about this poster is that it all hangs together really well. The graphic image all with these really large sort of pixel metaphor thing going on, is picked up nicely in the typeface for the media arts and also in the way the typeface word cloud is designed. So it has a very strong sense of continuity throughout the whole design. So this one works really nicely. This one here, kind of on the edge of edgy. The type a little small, so you need to kind of balance between what looks good and what actually is legible. The use of a very abstracted sort of watercolor image kind of makes it look a little artsy fartsy, so it kind of works with the media arts idea. The title area is nice and clean. Fine print's fine, so this is a nice kind of a cool graphic but with an image look to it. So this one works nicely. Here, another image that is being, for the most part, honored for its integrity. The text is running over the body of the person, but it's not, intruding on the idea of the person, taking the picture. Probably want to airbrush out the Canon, right? We don't ever want to be thinking about, what is that called? Product placement advertising. Unless Canon's a sponsor, which they're not. But, again, it has a combination of type, graphic, and image, and it has a nice balance, so thinking about how that might work. This is a super traditional layout, right? It's centered, the text is flagged. The imagery is a photo composite. I know that this girl did this composite, so that's kind of cool, So if you have the ability to do something like that, that is an option. Also, graphics from Project 4 might work as well, especially if you play around with them in Photoshop a little bit and sort of artsy fartsy them up a little bit. There might be an option there as well. Nice contrast in the typefaces. So nice and clean, traditional centered layout, but works very nicely. This one starts to get kind of busy. It's no longer an image anymore, right? This graphic behind here has turned into a graphic background. Or I should say an abstract background. It's still an image of sorts, but it doesn't have any particular, it's not an image of something, so it doesn't have a particularly powerful, message to convey, but it does add a lot of interest to the actual design of the project itself. So this actually is a very, very nice, very powerful poster using the blend modes to create these reversal effects, and it works really, really well. 75% is the title, which is fine. You could say, well, there's not a lot of negative space, and you'd be right. But sometimes the design itself actually works, and so it doesn't necessarily have to have a lot of negative space if everything is balanced nicely. So keep that in mind as you move through. This design here, you also have horizontal and vertical layouts, so you can play with either one of these as an option. Here the image is really graphicalized, it's no longer necessarily a very powerful communicator of an idea, but there's something there. It's kind of this dance thing, and it has this sort of painterly look, and using the graphic elements to isolate and allow the image to kind of come through a window is kind of cool. A nice balance between typography and graphic in terms of the overall overlap. That actually works pretty nicely. The title is fun and has a very kind of artsy-fartsy look to it. So this is a very successful design. It works really well. Call to action's dominant. The categories are good. So everything is holding together very nicely. Here's another example of a graphic that's, it is an image of something sorta, but it has a much more strong effect as a conveyor of concept rather than a conveyor of imagery itself. So this is a very very cool, very powerful. Another word cloud. This might even be an option from the one further up, now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah, okay, so this is essentially same design with an entirely different graphic treatment. So, just showing an example of how you can really take one thing and really change it and make it very, very different. So this was a very effective, the glow on the media arts. The advancing the business of creativity, this phrase here is a tagline. So it's not really part of the content for the actual categories. I'm okay with it in the word cloud idea. But just be aware that that is something that would be normally associated with the title of the competition. Speaking of which, the title of the competition's not there, right? Oh, look at that. I wonder if I saw that when I critiqued it the first time. I don't know. But there should be, right? The 18th annual, and there should also be, there is an 18th, but there should also be the media arts competition text. So make sure that you are including all of the text in your project. Don't be making an edit and taking things out just because you don't think it's something you want to do. All right, everything has to be there. This here, the graphic itself is, again, just a concept graphic. So text and so on can go over it. Graphically, a very powerful, very, very graphic poster. So it works nicely. Here we kind of looked at this quickly earlier. This graphic, again, is a abstracted concept type graphic. So it doesn't count as an image. The content works within it and around it. So that all works nicely. A little on the edgy side for the typography. So this design worked really, really quite nicely. In this case here, a little more artsy-fartsy in the title, but the graphic nature of the title, of the content, is very clean and very organized. This is the kind of stuff you were playing with in Project 8. And so now we can see how that can be applied to a real design. So that's a cool thing. Same thing here, right? We probably wouldn't have explored this had we not, done Project 8. In this situation here, I notice it's fairly often that people will try to make this A do double duty. In other words, the media and the arts, the A is shared between the two words. This, I felt, was an interesting approach to not having that letter form do double duty, but almost turning it into a graphic into itself. The typography for the annual competition is kind of fun. It's a nice contrast with the super clean, super architectural typeface for the media arts. The overall type design is nice. A little struggling with the orange on the gray. It's one of those things where it's just beginning to have a little bit of trouble. And when you print something like this, you might find that the contrast is even less than what you see on the screen. So if you're trying for a color contrast that you're not sure about, do a test first just to make sure it works. This is a web design, and it's a scrolling web design. So basically this would be what you see on a monitor at least, and then this is what happens when you scroll down. This is a pretty nice little design. These little highlights for the hierarchy work very nicely. It's picked up at the beginning here and followed through. So it's a nice continuity element. The gradient works really well. The graphic in the background is effective. I'm normally like, don't have pictures of palm trees and the ocean and waves and stuff that are endemic to Southern California because, people who live in Chico, or wherever, they don't have that experience, and so we shouldn't really be kind of playing up to something so regionally powerful. It needs to have a slightly greater, more, a more wide-reaching target market. Here's an example of a completely graphic poster using graphic areas. Very effective, colorful, powerful. The colors are bright but not primary. And this is, I think, an important thing. You know, it's okay to use bright colors. They're powerful, they tend to grab attention and so on. But you want to use something that's a little off primary. So this, I think, did a very nice job playing around a little bit with vibrating boundaries. If you remember from Project 4, we played around with color contrasts that created vibration. So that's something where, you know, kind of playing around with this. The typeface is graphic edgy. So the whole design feels, you know, pretty out there a little bit, right? So it's kind of cool. It works well. Here's another example of a purely graphic poster. The typography for the title is really well thought through. A lot of exploration went into getting this to be as effective as it is. You can't just simply throw this down and expect it to work. What I find a little troublesome is that the categories are almost lost. And this person here put the categories that don't have subcategories sort of on their own, which is, I don't want you to do that. You know, motion graphics as a category is just as important as digital imagery or audio or anything that has subcategories. So make sure that you treat the hierarchy of the category titles equally. That's really important. That said, we're having some serious contrast struggle with the text inside of these little color balls. So again, be really aware if you're doing something that is that's something that actually works, right? You don't want to have that legibility impeded by lack of contrast. The other problem with this poster is, of course, that the fine print is in a dominant position on the poster. So really, this stuff should have been put down here, and the categories and so on should have been put up here. So the layout itself still needed some work in terms of you know, getting the right information out front first, the basic hierarchy. Okay, so but what I really like about it is the style, and I really like the title, and I like the colors. So those are the things that are working, pointing out some of the things that aren't working quite so well. Another example of a purely graphic poster. Again, picking a lot off of the Project 8 typography exercise. This, I think, worked out really well. It's a very nice, clean poster. Fine prints about where it ought to be, although the call to action is no, that's the call to action, I'm sorry. So that's fine. I would have probably had the all entries a little bit more dominant so that it, you know, that bit of information comes forward. But overall, nice and clean and effective. This guy did a lot of work trying to make this 3D action work. He went through a lot of iterations and eventually settled on this one. And, you know, as a kind of a cool 3D sort of graphic, it really works very nicely. It has a neat kind of folded paper kind of look to it. So super effective. Takes some time to develop an idea like this, but the timing that he put into it was well used. Here's another nice clean graphic poster using little images as texture. So these are kind of fun things to do. You know, it's playful with the type, which is fun, kind of bounces around a little bit, but it works. And so, you know, this is a good example of where there's a lot of negative space and it's used effectively. This one here is a pure minimal design, and this is actually hard to do. Minimalism, because there's so little of it, can create the sense that the design wasn't really thought through or that it was just sort of blown out. And so here is a situation where it works actually really, really nicely. Careful of the minimalism. It needs to look well designed, and that's a difficult thing to do. You should study minimal posters and minimal design in general to get a feel for what works and what just looks too simple and undercooked. Okay. Another super clean design. a different approach using the vertical type, which is kind of fun. 2016's Big and Graphic kind of holds the two pieces together. The title doesn't have to be at the top. Title can be in the middle. Title can be at the bottom. So keep those options in mind as you explore your layouts. This one's just kind of fun. It's not amazingly different. But what was cool about it is this sort of radiation structure for the categories, which tends to kind of stand out a bit. The deadline is good. The call to action's a little hidden. As a matter of fact, oh, there it is down here. And I guess it's probably because of the fact that it's on this weird gray background that this actually kind of dies. But it probably could have used some color. You know, basically it probably could have picked up a little bit of the red in here, or the more information text or something like that, just to kind of bring the eye from there to here to down to here. So this would be a situation where we go back to project 4 and we think about how color moves our eye around the design. So very powerful, example of that. Here's a nice clean graphic poster. Texture, an image used as texture in the background. The angle of the perspective of the image plays off of the angles in the design itself. So super effective, super cool, clean design, very sophisticated, very complex in its own way, and it works really quite well. Same idea here. This guy worked through a lot of iterations to make this design work. And here again, the idea of using color, to bring our eye from place to place on the design, very effective. The typography is very sophisticated, has a lot of interest to it. Used a lot of the shapes very effectively, a lot of alignment going on. So picking up a lot from all of the, excuse me, of all of the exercises that we worked on throughout the course of the semester. Very nicely done on that. This is a cool design. I just wanted to finish up with this, showing different ways of approaching a very graphic poster. In here it's almost like little blocks. It's designed on a grid, and how do you fill in the different blocks? So it's just a very cool design, nothing radical, but it's just really clean and really innovative. In this case here, the title is used as a graphic element, which is fun. But because it's large and it's kind of playful, it has a totally different feel from what a lot of titles look like. So it has a very, very sophisticated, almost Swiss design look to it, and so it's very effective that way. So that's some ideas that you might think about as you start laying out your poster and thinking about how you might approach the style and the typography. Again, start with one poster and push that through to at least a reasonable layout. It doesn't have to be nearly done, but then once you get something that's starting to stylistically look like where you might want it to go, then you start with poster number 2 and do the same thing. And then at the end of the week, we'll take a look at the last, at the 2 posters and pick our best. All right, so hope this gives you some inspiration, and have some fun.